So I want you to think of society for a second, like a complex security system.
Okay, right.
We install it, to keep the monsters out. We build walls, we create laws, we establish hierarchies to protect ourselves.
Right, for safety.
Exactly. But today, we are looking at what happens when that exact same system, the one we built, locks the doors, turns the cameras inward, and decides that we are the threat.
Yeah, it is a terrifying pivot to study. And observing this transition, from a functioning society into a state of absolute control, it's a recurring theme when you examine human history.
It really is. So our mission today for this deep dive is exploring this really incredible dossier titled When Hierarchies Become Oppression.
It's a great read.
It is. We're going to decode the exact tipping point. Like, that's a specific moment when a functional social order just rots into tyranny.
Right.
We've got real-world historical blueprints of empires here, and we're going to cross-examine those blueprints with the fictional, but honestly, deeply psychologically accurate world of San Vitae, the awakening.
Yeah, and the value of this dossier, it treats history not just as a boring list of dates, right? It's a psychological autopsy of power.
Ooh, I like that phrasing.
Right. We are pulling back the curtain on the architecture of how control is built, how it's maintained, and ultimately, how it just breaks down the human mind.
Yeah. And the dossier poses this central, really unsettling question for you to think about. Every hierarchy begins as order, but at what point does order become control? Well, wait, let me rephrase, and control become oppression.
Exactly.
It makes you realize we aren't just talking about like a comic book villain taking over the world overnight in a sudden violent coup.
Right.
We're talking about structural decay.
Yeah, the historical case studies provided here really demonstrate that the shift from order to oppression is, it's rarely a singular event.
It's a slow creep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, let's look at the blueprint of Rome. The early Roman Republic was fundamentally designed around shared governance. It balanced power specifically to prevent the return of kings. That was the established order. But, as emperors eventually rose, that shared power was centralized.
Wait, but surely people notice that happening,
Mhm.
right? Like, if the government starts stripping away your rights, why doesn't the public just immediately push back?
Well, because of the method of placation. The emperors kept the populace compliant through what they called bread and circuses.
Right, bread and circuses, meaning they kept them fed and they kept them entertained.
Exactly.
Let's look at the mechanics of that for a second. If you give someone, enough cheap grain and a really good gladiatorial game,
Yeah.
they might just look the other way while you completely dismantle the Senate.
Yeah, they placated the immediate survival needs, right, and distracted the masses, which it served as a smokescreen for a growing culture of fear.
Wow.
Because behind the games, dissent was no longer treated as just a simple political disagreement. It became a capital offense.
Jeez.
Yeah, informants were planted everywhere. That security system was now actively hunting its own citizens.
But bread and circuses cost money.
They do.
So what happens when an empire's resources dry up? They can't keep everyone entertained forever.
No, they can't. And when a state can no longer afford to, buy compliance, it pivots to demanding it through sheer force.
Right.
The dossier actually points to Qin China as the prime example of this secondary blueprint, legalism and absolute rule. Order in Qin China wasn't achieved through harmony or shared governance. It was achieved through pure terror.
So they completely skipped the distraction phase and just went straight for the throat.
Pretty much. The first emperor implemented these draconian laws where even minor infractions resulted in mutilation or death.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they went further than just physical violence. They burned books to erase competing narratives.
Which is a methodical way of monopolizing the truth.
Exactly. And they even buried scholars alive to eliminate critical thought entirely.
That is, so Rome distracts you and China terrifies you into submission. But sheer terror just seems so exhausting to maintain. I have to imagine that if you push a population that hard with pure violence, eventually they snap. Like the pressure cooker explodes.
It does explode. Well, unless you manage to alter how the population perceives the violence itself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which leads us to the Aztec Empire. This introduces a profoundly different flavor of control. They utilized ritual, purity, and sacrifice as actual tools of statecraft.
Right.
Social control was justified not by state security, but through cosmic necessity.
Wait, human sacrifice? Like, how does a society accept watching their neighbors being sacrificed without revolting on the spot?
By framing it as the literal only thing keeping the universe intact.
Wow.
Yeah. The Aztec state enforced these strict purity laws that locked people into rigid social roles. The violence wasn't presented as, terror inflicted by a greedy ruler.
Right, it was something else.
It was framed as a sacred, burdensome duty to keep the sun rising and prevent the end of the world.
Okay, yeah. If the state convinces you that executing someone is the literal only way to stop the apocalypse, how do you even argue with that?
You don't.
You just accept it. The violence just becomes the way things are.
Right. Normalization of violence is a crucial structural pillar of oppression. When cruelty becomes routine, society simply stops recognizing it as cruelty.
Yeah.
The synthesis we can pull from all three of these historical sources is pretty stark. Oppression universally emerges when power centralizes, dissent becomes dangerous, ritual replaces reason, and fear becomes the foundational glue holding the society together.
So we aren't just victims of the system at that point.
Yeah,
Like psychologically, we actually become the mortar holding the bricks together.
exactly.
Which brings up something deeply unsettling in this dossier. Once the violence is normalized, why do we go along with it? I mean, why do humans obey so willingly?
Well, the dossier dives into several core psychological frameworks to answer that exact question. It points to Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo's famous behavioral experiments.
Oh, those are wild.
They really are. They show that humans adapt incredibly quickly to new, even horrifying norms. Oppression thrives because of our biological wiring for survival.
For you listening who might not have dug into those specific studies, let's break them down a bit. Milgram was the shock experiment, correct?
Yes, that's the one.
Where researchers brought ordinary people into a lab and told them to deliver electric shocks to a stranger in the next room every time they got a question wrong.
Right. And the learner in the other room was just an actor. There were no real shocks, but the participants didn't know that.
They thought it was real.
Totally. They heard agonizing screams, yet the majority of ordinary people continued to dial up the voltage to lethal levels simply because, an authority figure in a lab coat calmly told them the experiment required them to continue.
They were willing to literally torture someone just to avoid the awkwardness of disobeying authority.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment took that concept even further.
Oh, definitely. Zimbardo randomly assigned college students to play the roles of either guards or prisoners in a mock prison.
Right.
Within days, the guards began exhibiting genuinely sadistic behavior, just humiliating the prisoners. And the prisoners, instead of banding together to rebel, they became depressed, compliant, and completely internalized their subjugation.
It proves how rapidly we internalize the roles assigned to us. We are wired to seek stability and avoid uncertainty. When a hierarchy becomes oppressive, people quickly learn to fear punishment more than they value an abstract concept like freedom.
Yeah, because authority, even cruel authority, it provides structure. It reduces uncertainty.
Right.
People lean into the role assigned to them because belonging to the system, even if you are at the absolute bottom of the ladder, it feels safer to the human brain than the terrifying, chaotic unknown of rebellion.
It's totally classic the devil you know situation. You might be in a brutal, oppressive system, but at least you know exactly what time the guards are going to yell at you every day.
Exactly. And the dossier highlights a terrifying core paradox regarding this behavior. It's that humans often prefer predictable suffering to uncertain rebellion.
Yeah.
This manifests in a psychological state called learned helplessness.
Let's explain how that works, because it's a massive key to understanding compliance. It's like staying in a toxic job or, a really bad relationship.
Right.
The misery is known, but the exit door feels like stepping off a cliff. We get addicted to the predictability of the pain.
That is a great analogy. Learned helplessness was actually first identified in animal studies. If you put a dog in an electrified box where it cannot escape the shocks, it eventually just gives up.
That's so sad.
It is. But the truly terrifying part is that later, if you lower the barrier so the dog could easily jump out and escape, it doesn't even try.
It just stays there.
Yeah, it just lies down and takes the pain. Its brain has literally rewired to believe the harm is uncontrollable, even when escape is finally right there.
The emotional numbness just takes over. This makes a standout line from the dossier hit so much harder for me. It says, oppression is not sustained by cruelty alone. It is sustained by compliance.
Yeah. The philosopher Hannah Arendt coined the term the banality of evil to describe this very phenomenon.
Right.
When she was covering the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a major architect of the Holocaust, she noted he wasn't, a cartoonish sociopath.
He's just a guy.
Exactly. He was an incredibly terrifying, ordinary bureaucrat just following orders and seeking career advancement. Oppression needs armies of ordinary people to just follow the system without questioning it.
But you can't just hold a sword to a million throats forever. I mean, people will eventually try to jump out of the shock box.
Yeah.
How do oppressive systems keep people voluntarily sitting there?
Well, they utilize what we can call the justification machine. Dominant groups always create ideologies to convince the populace that the suffering isn't just inevitable, but that it's actually legitimate.
Okay, let's unpack that metaphor for the listener, because it's not a literal machine. Think of it more like a massive industrial processing plant.
I like that.
Right. The raw material going in is pure state violence. But it gets fed through these massive gears of philosophy, religion, and tradition.
Yeah.
By the time it comes out the other end, it doesn't look like violence anymore. It looks like the law. It looks holy.
That is a perfect visualization. Let's look at the philosophical gears of that machine first. Historically, there's a massive debate about the necessity of order.
Okay.
On one side, philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan, arguing that human nature is fundamentally violent. He claimed that a strong, absolute, even harsh ruler is the literal only thing standing between society and the chaotic, brutal state of nature.
Ah, the old "he made the trains run on time" defense. The argument is basically, yes, the dictator is brutal, but at least you aren't being murdered by bandits in the street.
Exactly. Furthermore, historical interpretations of systems like Confucianism often prioritize stability, filial piety, and social harmony above individual liberty.
Right.
The hierarchy is presented as natural and entirely necessary for the survival of the community.
But on the other side of that philosophical gear, you have the counter-argument, right? That freedom is paramount.
Yes. The Enlightenment thinkers push back hard, insisting that power must serve the people, and if it doesn't, it is entirely illegitimate.
Okay.
Later, existentialist thinkers argued that oppression is much worse than just restricting physical movement. It's a theft of meaning. It destroys the self by taking away your ability to define your own identity.
Wow. So I pose this central philosophical divide to you, the listener, right now. Is order worth the cost of autonomy? Because that is the bargain every empire offers you.
And to ensure you actually take that bargain, empires frequently engage the second gear of the justification machine theology.
And there we go.
Rulers claim a divine mandate. They aren't just kings, they are appointed by the gods.
Which means questioning the king isn't just a crime against the state. It's literally a sin against the cosmos.
Exactly. We see this with purity laws in rigid caste systems. The separation of classes is enforced not just by guards, but by sacred texts that justify brutal punishments for stepping out of line. It makes the oppression feel unquestionable.
Right. If the oppression is holy, it's infinitely harder to resist. You are fighting the very fabric of reality. Now, let me jump in here real quick and explicitly state for you listening. We are not taking sides on modern politics or modern religion.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to preach. What the dossier is showing us and what we are reporting on is that the architecture of belief is simply a tool.
Yeah, and the dossier provides a really crucial caveat regarding that tool. The exact same architecture of belief, like the exact same gods and texts, can be used to justify rebellion.
The justification machine can run in reverse.
It really can. We see this in liberation theology, where sacred texts are reinterpreted as a direct mandate from the divine to free the oppressed. We see it in the Buddhist rejection of ego-driven, worldly power. We see it in indigenous spiritualities that emphasize balance, stewardship, and interconnectedness over these top-down exploitative hierarchies. The tool can build a prism, or it can forge a key.
That's fascinating. You know, looking at all of this through real-world history is heavy. But the dossier gives us a laboratory to see all these gears turning without our own historical baggage getting in the way.
Right, the fictional side.
Yeah, it points us to the fictional world of San Vitae, the awakening. We get to apply everything we just talked about, Milgram, learned helplessness, the justification machine, to this incredibly vivid fictional mirror.
Yeah, let's examine the ruling class in that universe, the San Vitae Council. They are a textbook example of a hierarchy that has crossed the line into full-blown oppression.
Totally.
They embody all the historical blueprints we discussed. Their power is entirely centralized. Dissent is violently publicly punished to create a spectacle of terror. And they utilize complex, brutal rituals entirely as a mechanism of control.
And the Santeries have a twisted variable that Rome or the Aztecs didn't have, which is immortality.
Yes.
The dossier dedicates an entire section to the ethics of immortality. and how endless time causes severe psychological decay.
It really does.
When you never die, you lose empathy, because empathy is fundamentally tied to shared human vulnerability. Without death, their sense of meaning dissolves, and they resort to extremes, to profound cruelty just to feel something. They completely confuse their rigid order with righteousness.
Yeah, and the way the Santari maintain their rule is just a masterclass in the justification machine.
Oh, absolutely.
They claim biological superiority through their command of a mysterious force called Vitae energy, and they create this ironclad illusion of necessary order. They tell the lower classes, known as the Humanis and the Sans, without us, you would be destroyed by the monsters of the wastes.
It is Thomas Hobbes' argument brought to terrifying life. Serve us or die in the chaos. Which brings us to the character Curian. If the Santari represent the oppressive hierarchy, Curian's is the human collateral. He is a conscript, essentially bound in eternal servitude to a Santari covenant named Mayasuchi.
Curian's narrative arc serves as an in-depth exploration of the psychology of compliance we talked about earlier.
Yeah, he really goes through it.
He was forced into a role as both a protector and an executioner for his masters. Over time, he deeply internalized the authority of the Santari. He exhibits classic symptoms of trauma-driven learned helplessness and hypervigilance.
The dossier talks about his martyr complex. He actually justifies his own subjugation. He takes the beatings. He endures the psychological torture because, well, it's predictable pain.
Right.
He convinces himself that his suffering is a necessary sacrifice to keep the people he loves safe. He has basically stopped trying to jump out of the electrified box.
And Curian's story is about the agonizing, terrifying process of breaking out of that predictable suffering. His awakening isn't a sudden realization that the Santaris are bad. I mean, he always knew they were cruel.
Right.
His awakening is finally facing the uncertainty of rebellion. It's the crushing realization that his obedience isn't actually protecting anyone. It's just feeding the very machine that oppresses them all.
Wow. So to rebel, he has to unlearn his own identity.
Exactly.
The dossier notes this phenomenon of existential oppression, where the system doesn't just take your freedom, it steals your ability to even imagine a different life. Curian's entire sense of self is fused to his servitude. To break free, he literally has to risk destroying who he believes he is.
And this brings us to how the mechanism of control actually breaks down. The Santari absolutely fear emotional connection among their subjects.
We hate it.
Yeah, authoritarian systems heavily regulate relationships because genuine intimacy creates micro-communities of trust. When Curian begins to truly connect with Sharina, who is another survivor of horrific trauma, their shared suffering creates a powerful solidarity.
That solidarity restores his agency.
Right.
The Santari demand he be an emotionally hollow weapon, totally isolated. His devotion to Sharina openly defies that expectation. It perfectly illustrates the dossier's point. To rebel is to affirm one's humanity in the face of dehumanization.
It shatters what philosophers call the panopticon effect.
Oh, let's explain the panopticon because it's such a fascinating concept.
The panopticon is a theoretical prison designed by Jeremy Bentham and later analyzed by Michel Foucault.
Okay.
Imagine a circular prison with cells along the outer wall and a guard tower in the very center. The trick is the prisoners cannot see into the tower.
So they never know who's watching?
Exactly. They never know if a guard is watching them or not. Because they might be watched at any given second, they just assume they're always being watched.
They start policing themselves. You don't even need guards anymore. The prisoners do the job for you out of pure paranoia.
Right. And Curian was living in a mental panopticon. He policed his own thoughts, his own desires, out of a deeply ingrained fear of his masters.
Yeah.
But his bond with Sharina introduces an emotional loyalty that finally becomes stronger than his internalized fear of the invisible watcher. The connection literally breaks the spell of the panopticon.
So what does this all mean? We've traveled from the Roman Forum to the Aztec pyramids, through the dark corridors of the Milgram experiments, all the way to the fictional wastelands of San Vitae.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. I want to distill this entire deep dive into one massive takeaway from the dossier.
We've covered a lot of ground, yeah, but the core message is surprisingly sharp.
The dossier states, oppression is not an accident. It is a natural evolution of unchecked hierarchy. Or, as the source brilliantly puts it, when power stops serving people, people start serving power.
Recognizing the tools of the justification machine is the first step in dismantling it. You cannot break out of a prison if you don't understand how the locks work.
Right.
By identifying the manufactured fear, the weaponized rituals, and that psychological demand for unquestioning compliance, you actively rob those tools of their invisible power over your mind.
Which brings us right back to where we started today, the security system.
Yeah.
We build these social structures to keep us safe, but we have to be the ones continually checking the cameras.
Yes.
We have to make absolutely sure they are pointing outward, protecting us, and not pointing inward, controlling us.
It requires relentless vigilance. Not just keeping an eye on our leaders, but, observing our own tendency to comply simply because following the rules is easier than questioning them.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. Take a hard look at the many hierarchies in your own life today.
Good idea.
Look at your workplace structure. Look at your local community. Look at the digital spaces and social media platforms you inhabit every single day. Ask yourself, are these structures actually serving the people within them? Or have you just internalized the rules to the point where you are serving the structure?
It is a really uncomfortable inventory to take, but it's an essential one.
Because the moment you realize you're just maintaining a ritual out of fear, or staying in the electrified box because it's familiar, well, that is a moment the invisible walls start to crack. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the systems around you, and we will catch you on the next one.